Welcome, everyone. As we wait for people to come in, please put your name, your organization, and why you're attending this webinar today in the chat so we can get to know you all. So we are going to start in a little bit, but thank you all for coming. I see the number is still going. So we're going to wait about 2 minutes for people to go ahead and start logging on. But as we wait, if you could please put your name, your organization, and why you're attending this webinar today in the chat for us. I love seeing where everyone is from. We have people from Wake County. We have some people from Chapel Hill, from Durham Public Schools, Pitt County. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said, we'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. We want to wait for everyone to kind of join in, but as you wait, please put your name, your organization, and why you're attending today's webinar in the chat for us. Thank you all for attending. Our numbers are still going up. Thank you all again for attending. We're going to give it one more minute. But while we wait, again, please put your name, your organization, and why you're attending today's webinar in the chat. We're more than happy to have you here today. Very excited for our student and educator panel. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so we still have some people joining, but we're going to go ahead and start. So first, I just want to say thank you for attending our third installment of the Student Voices webinar. Today, our topic will focus on ensuring equitable access to advanced placement or rigorous courses. And so the Dudley Flood Center at the Public School Forum is thankful for our funders, and you will see a list of them on this slide. We would not be able to do this work without our funders. So we are very thankful and want you all to just give them a silent clap of thanks and appreciation really quickly. And we also recognize that this week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and we are so happy and so thankful for our teachers. We recognize that over the past year, our teachers have been busy and working hard to reimagine and redefine what their classrooms and what learning will look like for our students. So we are thankful and we appreciate you. And we're thankful that you took the time out today to come to this webinar. And speaking of that, we do have a poll because we want to see who is in our audience. So we will have a poll come up in just a few seconds. If you could please just click which category you fall into or what best describes your profession right now, so we can just get a just quick feel for who is in the room with us today. Looks like we have a lot of school and district administrators and some educators, K through 12 educators here with us. This is awesome. Thank you guys. So we're going to have this close in just a few seconds. And wow, we have a lot of school and district administrators here, a lot of educators, nonprofit and community organizers, school support staff. Thank you all again for attending. We have a couple elected appointed officials here, students. We are so thankful for you to be here, and we welcome you to join us in the chat as we go through this. So just to give you a kind of preview of what is going to happen today. So right now we are in the welcome phase, and we will move into an introduction in which we will have a little bit of slides just to kind of give you some background, a little bit of information into rigorous coursework, advanced placement, what that means. Then we'll move into our student panel, and we'll have our students speak on their experiences and their perspectives of this issue. And then we'll close up our student panel and have a quick break. We'll have some questions that we put in the chat, and we welcome you to engage in the chat. And then we'll transition into our educator panel. And then same thing here, we'll have some questions and perspectives from our educators. And then we will close it, have a quick break, and do a wrap up, and have an evaluation link with CEU link in there as well. So thank you again. So please join us in the conversation. These are our social media tags. We welcome you to promote this event and share what the thoughts and what takeaways you have from this event. If you have any questions for the panelists, we ask that you put it in the Q&A so we do not miss it. Please put all questions in the Q&A. And if you have any reflections, if you want to join in the conversation, we ask that you put those reflections in the chat. So let's first start off with the idea of rigorous coursework. We want to understand there is legislation around this, and we want to understand what does the legislation say. And so it is the intent of the state of North Carolina to enhance accessibility and encourage students to enroll in and successfully complete more rigorous advanced courses to enable success in post-secondary education. So we do have to go ahead and say that there are research studies that have linked advanced coursework, advanced placement courses into more success in obtaining post-secondary education, as well as being successful in post-secondary education. So there is an intent behind wanting to provide every student with rigorous coursework. And so the impact of this legislation is that it does target low-performing districts. And so it does give financial support, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It does give a technical assistant on site and intentional professional development. This is statewide, so it does provide professional development, AP Summer Institute training, AP Annual Conference, and AP mentoring programs. So these are just the different supports that the legislation created and the impact that it is having with our schools and districts. And so again, we talked about there is some funding attached to this. So one thing about this legislation is that it has created and encourages access for all by eliminating some of the fees that are associated with these courses and exams. And so we all know that when you are selected or choose to be in an AP course, there is an AP exam or IB exam or an advanced coursework exam that you have to take. And so this legislation did provide schools and districts with the funds to cover those costs for students, eliminating a possible barrier, a financial barrier for students. Then in terms of increasing coursework availability, as we said, this legislation was put into place so that all students have access to these courses. And so this is the support that is offered through the legislation. Each district is different, and so we encourage you to talk to your district or school leaders about what you provide. And so we want to give an understanding, when we say an academically or intellectually gifted student, an AIG student, what do we mean? And so I'm not going to read all of this off for you, but some of the definitions that we come up with. An academically or intellectually gifted students perform or show the potential to perform at substantially high levels of accomplishment when compared with others of their age, experience, or environment. Gifted students exhibit high performance capability in intellectual areas, specific academic fields, or both in intellectual areas and specific academic fields. And so when we say what is an academically or intellectually gifted program, we say it is a program that is intended to serve students with higher abilities, and it challenges students in regular classroom settings and provides enrichment and an accelerated curriculum. And so an advanced placement course, or AP course as they are more recognized as, is a rigorous college level class in a variety of subjects that gives students the opportunities to earn college credit while in high school by scoring a 3 or higher on the AP exam associated with that course. And so this is another common course that is an advanced coursework course, and it's an International Baccalaureate, or IB course. It follows a curriculum created by the International Baccalaureate Organization, IBO, a nonprofit educational foundation located in Wales. And so students can take individual IB classes and earn a certificate of completion for each class, or they can earn an IB diploma for students, and it is a 2-year program for juniors and seniors. I actually was an IB student, so I do recommend that course for all students. It really was a great pathway for me to be prepared to go to college and to really just be challenged academically and critically in class. So here are some trends that we're here to talk about today. So students of color are underrepresented in most rigorous courses and programs offered in North Carolina schools. This includes advanced placement, IB, and academically gifted. In 2015, and so we will have a little bit more of updated data when we talk to our educators. In 2015, one of every 3 low-income students with superior math grades were labeled as gifted, compared to 1 out of 2 high-scoring students from whose family income was too high to qualify for federal lunch subsidies. So what we're seeing here is underrepresentation of students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. And so this is just a little bit of a chart just to show kind of that underrepresentation of students of color. So if you see right here, the lighter blue graph or line bar is their actual percentage of students of this demographic in schools, in North Carolina schools. And then the darker blue bar is their representation in advanced placement courses, and this is both math and reading. And so this was taken from the Erasing Inequalities report from CREED, and there will be a link to that in the chat. So if you want to take a look deeper into this data and some more data that they have, please do so. We also have our Study Group 16 report, in which we did a background on this as well. So we will provide the links to both of those reports in the chat for you. And so just a little definition about what the North Carolina Advanced Placement Partnership, which came out of that legislation to encourage more students to take rigorous coursework and have access to rigorous coursework. It is a partnership between North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and the College Board, and it is to encourage and support more students to complete more rigorous courses in North Carolina. And this was started in May 2014. And so now we just want to, again, open up our panel for students. And so I'm gonna have them introduce themselves in just a second, but I do want to remind everyone that we want to interact with everyone in the chat. We wanna be respectful. If you do have questions for our students, please place them in the Q&A box. And throughout this conversation, we will have little questions in the chat that we want you to respond to and engage with each other on. And so I'm going to ask all of our students to go ahead and turn on their cameras, and we're going to get started with today's panel. So thank you all of my students for being able to show up today. We are very excited to have you share your experiences and your perspective on this issue. And so first, I just want to have you introduce yourselves. And so I'm going to ask you to give your name, the county in which you go to school, and when did you first begin being placed in an advanced or rigorous coursework class? So first, we're going to start with Shalina.
Hello, so I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Shalina Morgan Lopez, and I'm a student in the Wake County Public School System. I'm here today representing Wake County Equity Affairs from their student cohort. I was first placed into advanced courses probably at the beginning of middle school as a result of my test scores from elementary school. And I'd taken like Math Plus throughout middle school and was placed in honors courses my freshman year of high school. And ever since then, I've been applying for higher level courses, and I'm currently enrolled in my school's advanced placement program.
Thank you. So Mr. Nash, will you please introduce yourself?
My name is Makai Nash. I am a part of Annapolis City School District. I was placed in honors level courses in sixth grade, and then in seventh grade and eighth grade. I also took honors level courses, and now I am in L. Brown, and I am a part of the AP Academy at my school.
Thank you. Mr. Pittman, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Terrence Pittman, and I am a 14-year-old eighth grader in the Nash County Public School System. And I was placed in advanced placement courses starting in maybe sixth grade, following earlier in elementary school, where I was placed in classes with higher level thinking teachers who wanted to push students to think deeper and more critically on issues that some other students may not have caught up to yet. So yes, that is me.
Thank you. Mr. Borders, will you please go next?
Hi everyone, my name is Isaiah Borders. I live in Rowan County, and I started taking gifted courses in fifth grade, and I was enrolled by a teacher's suggestion.
Thank you. And last but not least, can we please have Sienna introduce herself?
Hi, I am Sienna Hall. I am a 15-year-old freshman in the Transylvania County School System District. I started being placed in advanced classes and honors courses in the middle of elementary school, so third grade, when my test scores proved that I should be placed into those courses and I was excelling above average.
Thank you. And I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Kazoo. I am the Associate Director of the Dudley Flood Center at the Public School Forum of North Carolina, and I will be the moderator for our student panel today. So first, we're just going to have our students just kind of describe, as we've seen the research say that there is underrepresentation of students of color and those from low income backgrounds. What are some of the barriers that you have noticed or seen or experienced yourself in gaining access to rigorous coursework, or that you have witnessed your classmates go up against in terms of gaining access to coursework? And we're going to start with Shalina.
So to my personal experience, and as well as speaking on behalf of some friends of color that I have, in my school district specifically, it's been pretty difficult for us to obtain those courses, as often when we do apply for them, we either don't get into those courses or we're told that maybe we should reconsider. In my experience, I remember last year when I was applying to be placed in AP English for my junior class, that I was told that maybe I should consider taking the honors class, even though I had an A that previous semester.
Thank you. And Sienna?
Speaking not necessarily from previous experience, but watching others around me, test scores hadn't always proved that they should be, but they had worked to get to that position. And these were people of color who had been told that maybe they shouldn't take higher courses as previously stated, that they should stick to the honors classes, or maybe they should just stick to regular. And even though I was placed into advanced courses at a very young age, I did see other people around me in those courses, and none of them were people of color. I was one of the only people until I got to my freshman year of high school.
So then my next question would be, have you witnessed in any way that being virtual has impacted that type of challenge in any way? Has it helped improve getting students to access to these rigorous courses, or have you seen more students have trouble getting access to these courses?
I think the virtual learning has had a huge impact on these advanced classes and advanced placements. For one, it's taking a big toll on kids' grades and attendance levels in school. And I think that very much, it affects how they get into those courses and really their application to go on to further classes and more advanced placements. And I think that it also is very hard to balance schoolwork during a pandemic and the mental health crisis we currently face.
I definitely agree with you, Sienna. And I've actually seen firsthand the statistics of my school. We've seen actually that the gap, but the grade gap and the test score gap between students of color and white students has widened in the past year ever since we've been, at home schooling. And I think that's currently making it even more difficult for students of color to want to pursue those higher level courses. And, I know this is another topic, but another thing that impacts that is access to resources in order to be able to successfully complete those courses and take those exams.
Thank you both for that perspective. You guys are hitting on some really big issues that we all are trying our best to work together to address. So thank you for your answers. So moving a little bit further into this, and I think one of you kind of hit on this point. I think it was you, Sienna. What are some challenges that you have encountered while being enrolled in these classes? I know you mentioned that you were one of the only students of color up into a certain grade. Have you all witnessed any other challenges by being in an advanced placement course? And I'm going to start with Makai, if you could please speak on that.
Some challenges that I have faced while being in advanced courses is, like she said, like being the only person of color in classes. Like I took Math 1 and English and math, and I was the only Black person. So some challenges I faced was being the only Black person. I really pushed myself harder to do the extra credit and to do more work in these classes because I was basically representing my color in these classes, and that really pushed me to succeed in these classes.
Thank you. Shelina, would you weigh in on that as well?
Yes, to piggyback off of what Makai said, yeah, you got to look at representation. And as you said, to begin with, there is low representation of people of color in these advanced placement courses. And so when you look in classrooms and you don't see many people who are Black or Hispanic or Latino or somebody who is not of white ethnicity, you look at them and sometimes people want to assume that, maybe they're trying to like, pitied on because people assume that we don't have the thought process that other white students do that may think more critically than other people do. So, yes.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one really quick?
I agree 100%, Terrence. And I think another point that I could add to that is that students of color are more likely to join these courses if they see people like them already in these courses. And like you were saying before, I've had a similar experience where we start off in these honors courses and there's only one or two kids that look like us that are in these courses. So we feel like we need to represent the rest of the Black students in the school and that we need to put up this kind of facade to make us seem very professional and intelligent. And as we continue to get to higher level courses, there's less and less of us. And that may discourage a lot of students from wanting to pursue these classes, even when they have the full capability and the full potential to succeed in these courses.
Thank you all for your perspective on that. You're hitting on a lot of different points of respectability politics and also just this kind of underrepresentation in staff and in students, and kind of just the understanding of, can I do this? Are there people who look like me who are doing this? Am I able to? So thank you. And Terrence, you brought up a really good point about being prepared and supported to be successful in these classes. So how can educators prepare, support, and encourage students to enroll in advanced courses?
Yeah, so educators can prepare, support, and encourage students to enroll in these courses by pushing more and more info out into areas, neighborhoods, for instance, that don't have the same resources financially and socially with getting information from schools and from teachers. And so they might not be able to access these things because their community may not be so much as up to date technology-wise with knowing about how to enroll in these courses. And so I think a really good tip is, for educators is to consider the fact that some students don't all come from places where there is free broadband, where broadband is even available to be able to be hooked up. And so I advise, going into these lower funded communities and pushing out the word that, your child is or has the opportunity to enroll in these courses, and they should advise that they take the opportunity of this when they can.
Thank you. Isaiah, will you weigh in on this one?
Yeah, so teachers can prepare students to enroll in advanced courses by being transparent about the workload and topics they'll be dealing with. And this allows for students to have a clear understanding of what they're signing up for. And also teachers can support and encourage students to enroll in advanced courses by creating an environment that is open for any race or background in the classroom.
Those are some really, really great points about, number one, the fact that some areas do not even have access to broadband. They cannot hook it up. And that is more in our rural counties and our rural areas. And then also just being more upfront about what is expected of students when they go into these courses, so that they know up front, this is the type of effort that I'm going to be putting in, and I can do it. I can do it because this teacher is approaching me about it and believes in me and shows that they have a higher expectation for myself. So just thinking about, like, when you say being transparent about what the workload is, what are the differences between the workload or the material coursework in a standard class versus an advanced course? Isaiah, could you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, so one difference that stands out the most is the amount of assignments I receive between the two classes. For a standard class, I usually just receive an assignment that is due that same day. But for an AP course, I receive multiple assignments at once with different due dates that has to be completed within a certain time frame.
Makai, will you jump in on this one as well?
Yeah, I also have noticed that, my AP classes they give more work, and they give more work at a time. So they give us a certain date, and you're supposed to turn the work in by that certain time. And so they most definitely are harder to do, but than my standard classes. But I noticed that they're not impossible to do, which I know, talking to some people of color, that they do get discouraged because they feel like that standard classes are easier, and they can't do AP classes, but you can, because it's just all about doing your work, time management.
And so I noticed that we do have some questions coming up in the chat, and I just want to remind folks to please put those in the Q&A so that we can ask them a little bit later in the student panel portion. So piggybacking off what you guys are saying in terms of just the amount of work and the different types of due dates, I'm wondering a little bit more about, do you feel connected in these classes? Do you feel engaged in these classes? Do you feel like your teachers in advanced coursework have a different level of engagement than those in your standard classes? And I'm going to welcome anyone to jump in on that one.
I think this. Oh, I think that it's actually quite the opposite. From personal experience, most of my advanced teachers have been disconnected from their students and go through the motions with them because they think their intelligence level should be able to push them through the course without the guidance of a teacher. Whereas in lower classes or regular education classes, teachers are very connected with their students and they make them feel known and welcomed, and they guide them through the coursework. And I think that could also be a big issue, touching on the topic of intimidation into these bigger classes, because if you're not intelligent enough to be pushed through on your own, then you're not going to make it. So.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Like in honors and AP courses versus in standard courses, as it is, we're expected to elaborate more on our responses. Courses tend to move more quickly, and we tend to have more essays, at least in my experience. And I think with teachers specifically, they often are less engaged with their students in higher level courses, as they feel that you're already expected to know how to do this stuff on your own. And I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of people are discouraged from taking these AP courses, because they're in fear that they won't have as much guidance as they might have otherwise.
Thank you both for that perspective. And so one thing that I did want to ask you guys about is, when you talk about reaching out to families and parents, I want to ask, how have your educators engaged with your parents or guardians in your academic growth or your academic path? Have you witnessed your teachers or educators in your building reaching out to parents? And if you have, how have you seen that happen? I'm going to start with Mr. Pittman first. Terrence, I'm going to stop you right there. I just want to make sure. Can everyone hear him? Terrence, I think.
What's going on?
Sorry, Terrence, can you back up a little bit? I think your sound went out. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my fault. But yeah, like I was saying from the beginning, I said that I am lucky to have had teachers who have always kept somewhat good connection with my parents based off of what I was learning and keeping them engaged with the curriculum that was taking place and making sure that they were aware that, if my grades slipped, they were making sure my parents were aware of my growth as well in class. And so, yes, that has always happened for me.
Got you. And Sienna, can you please share how you witnessed your educators or teachers engage with your parents or guardians?
Yes. In my school district personally, it has not been about race much more than your social status within the community, because I come from a very small town. So from elementary school to about middle school, it would depend on how close your parents were with the teachers and how well known you were. You would get checkups on you. You would have a lighter workload. Your parents would know everything that was going on and most likely be involved in the school. And it wasn't until I got to high school until my teachers started reaching out to students and parents started getting notified about growth and opportunities within the school. And everybody started getting the same experience with parents knowing and being involved in student education.
Thank you. And so those were some ways that you guys have seen teachers and educators be involved, whether it was dependent on certain factors or not. And so I'm going to open this one for everyone to answer if you feel or have any advice. But what advice would you give to educators on how to best or how to effectively communicate with your parents, engage them in your academic pathway? I'm going to open that for anyone who has any advice for the teachers.
I find that it's much easier for staff and for teachers to communicate with parents once they engage with you first. I think I've been able to connect best with teachers and staff who acknowledge things that I'm also doing in the community, or things, or just anything they notice about me that, they can pull me aside and be like, hey, that's really cool. And then try to build a relationship with me that isn't strictly about, assignments and turning in work. And once you do have that better connection with them, you tend to want to participate more in class and be more engaged in general. And just having that great communication between yourself, the staff, as well as your parents will, I think, build a good relationship and a good, outstanding performance from the students throughout the course.
Great. So building rapport is really what it is. Like, you have to make that connection with the students in order to make a connection with their parents. Does anyone have any other advice that they would offer educators or teachers or principals and administrators? All right, it seems like Shalina hit that one right on the head. So this one is going to be for everyone. What advice do you have for educators to ensure that all courses and education materials are challenging students to think critically? And so what I mean by that is, we do have advanced placement courses, and that is great. But we want to make sure that all of our students are being encouraged and challenged to reach their fullest potential. So what advice would you give to teachers in order to make that happen in the classroom? And I'm going to just call on someone to start off. Mr. Borders, will you start?
Yeah, so my advice is for them to take whatever they taught and explain it to their students how it applies to real world situations and experiences. This makes students take complex material and think about it in a more authentic setting. And nowadays, teachers teach the material, but don't really apply it to how it can, how students can apply and use it in their life. So, yeah.
That's a great point. Mr. Pittman, will you give in some advice that you have?
Yes. A way you can tell if your students are being pushed to think critically in all of their courses and not just AP courses is to look at if they are stagnant, if they are being complacent in and what they want to learn and what they're open to learning, and also what their grades are like. Do you see if they're growing? Do you see if they're failing? And so if you see that they are being complacent in what they want to learn, and you see that they are not really responding well to the questions that are being asked, especially if they are consistently asked questions that have been asked over and over again, that are off of the same curriculum and off of the same what they are learning continuously, that can tell if they are being pushed or not to think more critically.
Mr. Nash, will you give us your opinion on what advice you would give educators to ensure that all students are getting challenged in classes?
I agree with Isaiah, that I've seen in class, and I've even thought about, like, well, if you teaching me this, but how can I take this into the world and apply it to everyday life? And I feel like that if these teachers did explain more, like, if we learn math, how can I take this in use it every day? And so, like, I have had a teacher that did explain, like, if you do this problem, you can use this problem. If you go to a grocery store and it says 25% off or something, you can use what you learned in math to apply it to, well, I know that 25 off of 5 is something. And so I agree that using it in everyday life can help students critically think about what they are learning.
Those are great points. Great points. Ms. Shalina, will you jump in on this question, please?
I agree 100%. And I think adding on to that, another way to ensure that students do retain this information is when they get to start a dialogue. I feel that I tend to learn material best when I get to discuss my ideas with my peers and get to hear different sides and different perspectives.
Wonderful. So we have making it real world applicable, making me understand how can I use this material in the classroom that's going to challenge me and want me to learn more. And then we have, have discussions about it. Let's talk about what we're learning. So those are great points. So Sienna, can you please give us your opinion?
I wholeheartedly agree with what everybody else has been saying. They've been hitting it on the head. It's amazing. But I think another big thing we need to focus on is to stop drawing a line between so-called academically gifted kids and regular students, because I think when teachers do that, they create a stigma that once you're academically gifted, you can't go back. And if you are not academically gifted, you cannot work your way up the chain of intelligence. So I think that's one other big thing we need to do is break the stigma of there being a group of intelligent kids and a group of regular kids, because anybody can be intelligent. We just have to work to make them feel intelligent.
That is an awesome point, and I thank you all for giving your perspective. So now we're going to transition a little bit into our kind of Q&A portion. So I just want to remind everyone in the chat, if you have a question that you would like to ask our students, please put it in the Q&A so that we can capture your question and that we may ask it. So now we're just going to transition it over to our Q&A portion. And so students, as we discussed, if you would like to jump in on this question, please do so. I'm just going to put it to everyone. And if you have a response, just go ahead and take yourself off of mute. So this is a really good question. So what is your response, or what has been the response or that you've witnessed from other students when a teacher or educator suggests that you should not take advanced placement courses? What is the response there?
I have a teacher has told me that I could not take a AP course or take a course like this. And my response was to prove them wrong. I've seen a lot of my friends and people not do that and let it get to them and inevitably stop taking the courses. But I have always wanted to be or do something more with my life. So I feel like when somebody tell me I can't do something, it makes me want to do something even more.
Thank you so much. And I think that is a great point, that you should never let anyone's expectations or impressions or, thoughts about your potential affect what you can do. So thank you so much. Does anybody else want to jump in on that question? What is your response when someone says you probably shouldn't take an AP course or an advanced placement course?
To piggyback off of what Makai said, my response would be, I mean, just don't give up. I mean, like Sienna said in the previous question, she hit it really right on the head. She said, there's no way that you can't work up to it. You just got to keep going. You got to work your way up to it. It isn't that you can't get there. It's just that you're not there right now. And so you just have to keep working your way up. And eventually you will get there. Who knows? You may even get even way smarter than the kids that you once were labeled less smarter than.
Thank you. Shalene, I saw you kind of wanting to jump in. You want to give an answer to this one?
Sure. I wanted to speak to this because I have had an experience with a counselor where, like I was talking about earlier, where they thought I should reconsider being placed in an advanced placement course. And so I just went to another counselor. You know, you just find people that you know will, you know, encourage you and you know who will back you up in whatever decision you make. And to that point, I also wanted to speak to microaggressions because I remember freshman year of high school, I went to honors biology class, and I was there for Meet the Teacher Day. And I told my teacher, like, I'm in your first period class. And she goes, maybe you want to check your schedule again because that's the honors class. And I showed her the schedule and I was like, I am in your first period class. And I wanted to make that clear. So just standing your ground and making sure that you stick to what you know you can do, and just, you know, the people that you keep around you are those who you know are going to advocate for you and who you know are going to encourage you to pursue what you want to do.
Thank you. And I think you all made such a wonderful point. I'm pretty sure there are people in the audience who have had that experience as well. I have had that experience in my educational career where I was told I wouldn't be able to do something, and I was able through hard work and support of other educators to do that. So I think that is a great point. Do not let anyone put a cap on what your potential is. So these are all some really good questions. I'm trying to do my best. So I apologize if I do not get to your question. So, So I'm going to pose this question because I do know that some of you are looking into post-secondary education and are looking into going to college. And so they're wondering what support would be beneficial from institutions of higher education, such as colleges and universities, as you're navigating the admission process in terms of taking a rigorous course load. So I'm thinking this person is talking about the transition of the AP or IB course credits to the college credit. So when you go into college, you get credit for the courses that you've taken. Does anybody want to weigh on that one?
Well, I'm currently in the process of selecting colleges. I'm a junior right now. And so I think being in those higher level courses as it is will hopefully make the transition into college courses more smoother. And I've also been told that, you know, college does give you a sense of more freedom, and you do have a lot of resources, no matter what campus you choose to reside upon. And so I'm just looking forward to being able to have that experience to make my own decisions without being held back by, you know, standards or social things that have held me back in high school.
Got you. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that one? All right, so we're going to move on. So I do have a good question. And a lot of you talked about this and just what educators can do. And so the question is, what advice do you have for teachers who want to be transparent about the workload, but do not want to intimidate students by speaking about how much work is involved in advanced courses for the first time? Do you have any advice about that?
I feel like that teachers should really explain and help kids understand more. Like, yeah, the advanced courses are going to be harder because they're advanced. They're there to push you and challenge you. But I feel like the teachers should make it known that even though it's hard, if you take the time, like, I will be there to help you out if you need help, and be able to really connect with the student and let them give them a greater understanding about what this is. I feel like that everybody wants to do good and wants to have a future, and so really just need a push or just explaining to help them understand why they should do it.
Thank you. That's really good. So we need to make sure that our students know that they are going to be supported. They're going to be able to ask questions. They're going to be able to go to their teachers and ask for help when they need it. That's a great point. Does anyone else want to weigh into what educators can do to be more transparent, but also not intimidate students from taking advanced courses? All right. So we do have one quick question. So a lot of you mentioned the fact that you were one of a few students of color in the classroom. And then as you went up in the different courses in your grade level, that became even less and less as you went up. And so the question is, how many of you have had teachers who look like you, and what difference has that made, if any difference?
I'll speak on this one. I personally have never had a teacher that looks like me, such as being a woman, a biracial woman, but I have had teachers that are allies, I guess you would say, or very strong supporters of women like me, biracial women of color who are trying to get higher up with their education. And it has made a huge difference. He has been one of the most memorable teachers I've ever had. It was my English, my freshman English teacher, and he was beyond supportive. And if anything, it made me feel more intelligent knowing that someone else knew my intelligence and knew my worth. It definitely boosted me. And yeah.
Thank you.
I have had one, and it was my math 2 honors teacher. Math teacher, and she was Black, and I felt like that having a Black teacher was very. I felt more connected to the class because I knew that somebody was there to understand what is being Black, and so I feel like that she really did push me even more to do better in the classes because she know that it's more and it's challenging and it's harder being an African American student in an honors class.
That's a great point. Understanding the different challenges that you may face because of different stereotypes that are presented in classes is also a benefit. And like Sienna was saying earlier, just having someone who's going to be supportive. They may not look like you, but if they, again, understand the challenges that you may face, that is also supportive and helpful. So thank you both for that perspective. I don't want to cut anyone off. Did anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I agree 100% that having a teacher that looks like you be there to encourage you makes you want to try your best. And just having someone there to support you. In my case, it's someone who works in the Career Center at my school, someone there to support you who looks like you, who understands what you've been going through, especially when it comes to taking higher level courses, just makes life that much easier.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So there is a question here, and I'm going to put this towards our students who are more going towards the college area. And so they're wondering if students feel less motivated, I'm guessing they're saying, or they're feeling like there are less expectations of you now that some schools do not require the SAT or ACT. Do you feel like that is kind of lowering expectations for you? Or do you feel like, how do you feel about that some SATs, some schools don't require SATs or ACTs at this point?
I can speak to that. So inherently, standardized testing has never been catered to students of color as it is. But that's not to say there aren't students who are more adept to test taking than they are when it comes to grades or GPAs in terms of getting into college. So I don't think it's a bad thing that these tests are being waived. I think that's opening a door for more opportunities for students who look like us to be able to pursue higher education. But at the same time, I think those that do tend to test better and who are more likely to get into a college they might want to get into because of their test scores, that option should still be open for them.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one? All right. So we do have another question about expectations since we're talking about that. So the question is, do your white teachers seem to have higher expectations for your white peers than for you? Or excuse me, I'm sorry, maybe they mean the same expectations for your white peers as they do for you.
I can speak on this. I personally have never experienced a teacher having higher expectations for the white kids in my class, but they have never expected anything primarily out of the people of color in the class. Like, they would never validate their answers. They would never look at them when they raised their hand first. It would always go to the white kids. So it's not an expectation of the white majority in the class being better, but it's the predetermined thinking that the people of color within the classroom are not going to have the same intelligence level or ability to speak on issues as the white kids.
That is a different way to think about it. I think we many times think about the expectation. Sorry, Mr. Pittman, you go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, yeah, like I fully agree with what Sienna said. I haven't personally think that I've had a white teacher that had necessarily higher expectations for the white students, but there was always that presumption when the Black student or any person of color that was a student in the class, whenever they had an answer, it was never necessarily thought as to be the right answer that they were looking for, or was necessarily even, or it wasn't necessarily even thought out to be the correct answer at all. And so that assumption needs to be kind of dismissed within the education system, because that bias is going to lead to more and more people of color not getting the certain opportunities that they need to get within the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That is a great perspective, and I appreciate you guys for feeling that you can share that with us. So we have time for about 2 more questions. And again, I apologize if I have not gotten to your question. We do ask that if the students can stay after, that they please stay and engage in the chat. But I will ask 2 more questions. So I apologize if I did not get to yours. So in terms of, you guys just spoke about like the kind of signals that teachers are sending to students, whether that they are capable of answering those questions, and kind of leading to this expectation that students of color maybe will not be as intelligent or have the capabilities to think critically in the way that other students will. So this person is asking, how can teachers give specific and apparent signals that all students are welcome in advanced classrooms? They're saying that, some teachers may feel like obviously that is the intent and that is what they feel in their hearts, but they want to make sure that they're being transparent about that and clear about the fact that all students are welcome and they want all students to push themselves.
I think that if anything, teachers in the position to recruit necessarily for kids to come to their higher education classes and their advanced placement classes, I think it's important that they know that within the stigma of the kids who are not already there is borders and classes within that section of students. So I think they should know the issues we have right now with people of color students and white students, and they should be more open necessarily to the people of color kids, because they are already down so many levels that they should be more welcoming to them, to put them on the same level as the kids who feel entitled to the classes.
So that's a great point. Understanding, again, the different challenges and experiences that students of color may be facing at this point in time, and really just making sure that you're being explicit and understanding of where they're coming from, so that you can be an ally, as you said earlier, and just supportive and encouraging to all students, but especially those who may be facing a little bit more challenges, than those who may have already been in the classes or been in the classes for years and are just following that advanced placement kind of pathway through school. Does anyone else have any suggestions for teachers to be explicitly supportive of students being in their classrooms?
Just to add on to that.
Oh no, you can go first.
Okay, so just to add on to that, I think setting a welcoming climate is a great thing. Just, being encouraging and being smiling and making sure, you're checking in on the students is great, as well as the appearance of the classroom. Just having some, happy signs and, happy colors that can set a climate. is a great thing. I can personally speak to where I've been in a history class where my teacher had both a Confederate and a Back the Blue flag on the wall. And I'm sure you can imagine that that climate was not comfortable for someone who looked like me when we stepped into that classroom.
Definitely. So we don't realize how important our environment is in terms of feeling welcomed and feeling encouraged and ready to go. Like, you need your environment to welcome you as well as the people in the environment.
Going along with
Yeah, I was gonna add on. Oh. You can go first.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman.
With the environment and stuff, it's not even like teachers. Like, the teacher should make sure other students can make it a wonderful environment. Like, I've had to answer and raise my hand to answer a question, and it was like a white student would be like, "Oh wow, you knew the answer to that question." And so not only should the teacher should make the environment feel welcome, but she should also make other students, at least try to make other students make the environment feel welcome. Because anybody, not anybody, but everybody knows what they can do, and so they should be able to feel like if they raise their hand, they can answer the question and feel comfortable with their answer.
Definitely. Mr. Pittman, you go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with all three of their perspectives here. Yeah, teachers, I mean, you can just be just embracing of everybody. I mean, it even goes back to simply, in my personal experience, it's simply just body language. I mean, I've seen in my time where I had a teacher who, you know, the white students came in, you know, she was all happy and she was just ready to talk to them. But, you know, when somebody who looked like me came in, it was just like, oh, okay, hi, how are you? You know, like, it was never any like peppiness or, you know, no excitement rather to see me rather than seeing the white students. And so I think that can really set the tone too, as far as letting your students know that everybody is welcome.
Got you. Okay, these are all really great points. Thank you again for sharing. So we are running towards the end. I think we may have, I know I said two more, but I think we may have room for just another one, because I want to end with a really good on a good note and a good question. And so let's see, we have some more questions end up in here. Okay. Sorry, these are really good questions. I'm trying to make sure I ask them. And so, okay, so here's a discussion about curriculum. And so earlier we mentioned how having discussions would be great, and that really encourages you guys to learn and to want to be engaged. And so I'm gonna try to put two questions together. And so what has been your experience in terms of the level of conversation that you've been able to have in advanced courses? Is that a little bit different than your standard courses? And why has that been so impactful in your learning? Let me say the question again. So what has been the impact of having those discussions in your AP courses? Is the impact different than in your standard courses? And if it is different, why is it different? And why does that help you in your learning pathway?
If we're talking about having conversations kind of like we are right now, or just discussing the topics of race in general, in my experience in my AP courses, they often don't touch on them at all, or the teachers may get uncomfortable if you try to bring it up. And in my case, there wasn't much I could do because there was only me and one other Black student in that class. Whereas in academic courses or in honors courses, especially if the teacher is a teacher of color or someone who we know is an ally, we're more able to have these discussions. And ironically, I feel like these discussions are some of the most important discussions we could be having in a school setting. And so for them to kind of just be shadowed over when we are in higher level courses is quite upsetting.
Got you. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
I agree that like most of the time that if we do have the conversation, it is shadowed because it was it is three black people in my AP courses, and a lot of times I'll be sitting right beside somebody that is white, and they'll say something, and it would be like a complete discussion about it. And I would say I completely disagree about a lot of things because not because of race, but culturally, the way people are raised, we all see things differently. And so I feel like most teachers, especially in my honors classes, do having those difficult conversations because they feel like that is they don't need to be spoken. But most of the time they do need to be spoken because just because we disagree, that don't mean that they don't need to be talked about.
I think that is a wonderful point. Just because we disagree does not mean we cannot have a conversation, and it doesn't mean the conversation should not be had. And I love that you all are wanting and looking for those engaging conversations where you can learn from one another and grow together. So that's wonderful. So I am going to ask that we end on a good note, a really good question. I love this question. So this is going a little bit off track, but what has been your most memorable classroom lesson and why?
I think I can answer. It was a class I took last year. I took a world history course in seventh grade. That's actually a high school course, so I got credit for that. One of the most memorable conversations in that class was to separate character from it was to separate character from something else. It'll probably come back to me later on when I'm talking. It always does that. But it was basically explaining the difference in the character of a person and what they do. That was what it was. Distinguishing the character of a person and what their job is. We talked about world leaders as far as Martin Luther King, he fought for justice and peace, but little do we know, and even my teacher this year has taught me this. He says that Martin Luther King has always been known as this peaceful guy who fought for justice. And while all that is good and that's something that we all need in the world today, little do we all know that it is alleged that he was a very unfaithful husband and that he was not very faithful to his wife in relationships. And so that was a very memorable lesson that I've learned.
That's a lesson we all learn very, very early on. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I never really had, I can't target one specific memory in the class I had, but again, touching on my freshman English class I had, we would have many classes where we'd have to have class discussion and like cultural topics, and the teacher would leave and we would have to discuss within ourselves the topics at hand. And I just love that because I think we need more of that within our school systems. So that was very memorable.
Thank you. Anyone else, a memorable lesson they've learned and why?
Memorable discussion I remember having in class. It was sophomore year, and it was actually in an honors Black history course. We were talking about the correlation between taking lower level classes actually and having lower grades, and the correlation between that and the school to prison pipeline. And I think it was just such an interesting discussion because we just got to hear from all different perspectives of, how at-risk students are often predicted from the start of their educational career, and how they are more likely to end up in the quote unquote at-risk category and in prison, and what we could do as a community to combat this.
Thank you so much. And so I don't want to cut anyone off. So does anyone else want to jump in? Because we are running over into our next session. All right. So I want to thank you all of you for joining us today, for being able to come here. I don't know if everyone knows this, but we have some students here who literally came to this webinar right after taking the AP exam. So I just want to thank you all for being here. I thank everyone for being in the audience. We welcome you to stay into our educator panel and engage in the chat if you would like to. And we also want everyone to stay. We do have educators who are coming up next to speak on some of the same issues that our students spoke on and give their perspective on these issues as well. But I just want again to thank all of our students. We are more than appreciative that you have come and share your experiences and perspectives with us. So thank you all. And so now we are going to transition to our educator portion. And so it just give us a second to transition. And so right now, if you want to just take a minute to stretch, I know you've all been sitting in front of a screen all day. Take a minute to stretch to get your jitters out, move around a little bit, and we are going to have our educators come up next. And again, while we're waiting, I do want to remind you, thank you all for the questions that you had for our students. I want to remind you the same thing for our educators. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. We really want to hear from you. And again, I apologize if I don't get to every single question, but we want to make sure that we are listening to you guys, and we want to make sure that we're be able to ask our educators all that we need to ask. So please, 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 if you have a question, put it into the Q&A, and please still engage with us in the chat. If you can engage with us online through Twitter or social media, we love that as well. And we just want to make sure that we are engaging for you all. So thank you so much again for attending, and we're going to be ready to go to our next panel. I think we're waiting on one more person, and then we'll get started. All right, so we're going to wait for our next person to join us. We just need to transition them into a panelist. But while we are looking for that one person, I'm just going to ask for everyone to turn on their cameras if they can and leave themselves muted for just a second. But we will unmute once we start going into the questions. All right, there we go. Yay, welcome everyone. So again, same format as with the student. We are going to have our educators take a second to introduce themselves. And so what I want you guys to do is just please tell us your name, please tell us your title, and give us just a brief description of the work that you are doing on this topic. So I'm going to start with Ms. Beth Cross, if you don't mind. Ms. Cross, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, first mistake. My name is Beth Cross, and I am a state consultant at the Department of Public Instruction in the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education. And what was the third thing I needed to say?
Description
I think that's it. Oh, and so I work with AIG programming and also AP/IB and Cambridge programming and all advanced learning opportunities in the state, working to advocate for more for all students.
Thank you. And so we're going to move to Ms. Stephanie Cyrus if we can.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Cyrus. I work alongside Beth Cross, my amazing teammate there, and we work together to support school districts and leaders as they are working to ensure that the needs of gifted and advanced learners are met. I just have to say, though, I am so personally full right now from hearing from these students. Personally, just having been a high school teacher myself, it's always great to be in their space. And I'm so thankful to them for sharing what they shared. And I have like a new 1,000 reasons to keep getting up and keep pushing forward with this work. They were just amazing. And then professionally, so much of this topic is really the work that we have been doing over the last couple of years at the Department of Public Instruction. So really excited to share that with you today. So I'll stop for now, but thank you for having me today.
Dr. Bullock, Dr. Bullock, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Daniel Kelvin Bullock. I'm the Executive Director for Equity Affairs for Durham Public Schools. Extremely excited to be here and to be in such good company. And so in my work in DPS, essentially I advocate for equitable outcomes for students, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, et cetera. So I work in a number of different areas in terms of equity. However, the foundation of my work is around ensuring that there is equity in terms of race. And so, again, just excited to be here with you. And the students also moved me, and I'm just excited to be here to speak with you all today about this very important topic.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Lucas, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Lucas. I teach AP Human Geography and AP European History, as well as standard level courses in Cumberland County at Cape Fear High School. I am a member of the Equity Advisory Team for the county, as well as the creator and chair of the Academic Outreach Initiative, which focuses on recruitment of students of color and underprivileged students into AP dual enrollment in the EIG program, which started first at my school. And this past year, we've been expanding to 8 different schools around the county, as well as other counties, and still continue to try and expand, and currently created a new pilot program for the elementary and middle school version, really kind of just trying to think of different ways to recruit students outside of the traditional thought process of GPA, grades, or standardized tests.
And I mean, already from the introductions, I know this is going to be a great conversation. So we're going to jump right into it. And so, you know, all of you, especially those who work at our Department of Public Instruction, are aware of the state policies and practices that are in place around advanced coursework. And so we just want to know, what are some common state policies and practices that you've utilized or witnessed in identifying students for gifted or advanced courses? And then once we identify those, I have another question as a follow-up.
All right. So across the state, we have several key pieces of policy or legislation that really support this work in this area. And that give us kind of a framework for improvement and expectations, but also honor local context and flexibility. The first of those really is Article 9B, which is the legislation that really is about how do we identify and serve academically or intellectually gifted students in our state. Aside from that, we also have our North Carolina AIG program standards, and those standards help us to better understand everything from identification to service, curriculum differentiation, also talking about professional development and teacher preparation, partnerships, and accountability. And so all of those pieces woven together as well. You mentioned at the outset some of the legislation around broadening access to AP and other advanced courses like IB and Cambridge. And so certainly we have that in place. We have dual enrollment in place. So not only college and career promise in the broader scale, but also those cooperative innovative high schools that are supported through legislation. And then even more recently than that, we have the advanced math course enrollment legislation, which gives students an opportunity, those who score at the highest level, ensuring that regardless of their background, if they've scored at the highest level on the math end of grade or end of course assessments, they are then placed into honors or advanced course at the next level. So we have lots of these great policies and legislation that are in place, they set the foundation for the work, really because they give us the freedom to operate and give us an opportunity to push for these opportunities for students. And I think the impact of those is just that these are some good policies that are in place, so that we are working with those local units to help make sure that we're operating under the intent of that legislation and the intent of those policies, so that we can support students' access and success. And so I'm just really helping to open the doors for students.
I'd like to add Stephanie's point about Article 9B. You know, while we're at the state level trying to create systems that are not systems that are exclusive, we're trying to create systems that don't provide barriers. And one of the great things about Article 9B is that it allows local flexibility. So there is no state requirement for identification. It is each district's opportunity, I'd say, to figure out what is going to work in their local context. So that's another.
Yeah, and that gives them the flexibility. I love that you brought that up, Beth, because it gives them the flexibility to look locally and define what gifted is. They don't have to compare themselves, you know, like we don't have to compare Wake and Kannapolis City and Rowan Salisbury. They each have that unique opportunity to define that for themselves. And so that opens the door for us to consider lots of pieces of information as we're making identification decisions and services and deciding on services for students.
So that was a great point. So that we now understand that there is no state mandated way that we identify students for AP, advanced courses, all of that.
That is correct.
The fact that we have the kind of flexibility in each district county to identify. I'm wondering, Dr. Bullock, if you could just say, you know, what are the ways in which students are identified in your district? Just like that, your district. So just wondering what are the ways in which students are identified?
As far as students being identified as academically or intellectually gifted, one of the things that we do that I think is key in any district is universal screening. So in second grade in our district, we screen kids across the board. Any student that's enrolled in our school system, it has the opportunity to go through a universal screening process. And that is one of the ways in which we advance diversity in our AIG program. Our director, Ms. Laura Parrott, oversees that process. And that's one of the things that we have seen that has just given us a lot of growth in that area. When it comes to high school, we do a lot of work around advocating for diversifying our advanced level classes, you know, starting with honors, but also, of course, thinking about AP and IB. And even opportunities to take college level classes too, like making sure that that opportunity and that access to that opportunity is as widespread as possible. But yeah, those are, I would say that universal screening process is one of the key components to being equitable with the opportunity to be identified as AIG.
So I just want to ask just a follow-up. Can you explain a little bit when you say universal screening? Because I know there may be some people who don't know exactly what that is.
So universal screening essentially means that in second grade, or in any grade level for that matter, you give the opportunity to take the test, or the test to be identified as academically, intellectually gifted to everyone. So it's not necessarily based on a person's referral or anything of that nature. Everyone has access to that test. But other things that we do to expand that access is we, as opposed to just relying on a test, we also look at just different measures of giftedness and looking, maybe a student is showing giftedness in a way that is best demonstrated through a portfolio, or, you know, there can be other ways of identifying that giftedness. But universal screening essentially means that across the board, everyone has access to a particular measure to determine whether or not they should receive additional gifted services. And I also say additional because we have a strong emphasis K2 on everyone having access to gifted, getting exposure to gifted material in K2.
Thank you so much for the explanation. So piggybacking off of that question, because I know Mr. Lucas has a lot to say about that as well, I do want to go into the fact that, data, as we saw, our data and research has shown that students of color and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are underrepresented in advanced placement or gifted courses. And so what are the barriers that you have witnessed your students face in getting access to those courses? And I want to start with you, Mr. Lucas.
Sure. I think one of the first things is communication. When I talk with a lot of my students in my standard level courses, as well as students in other standard level courses, a lot of them honestly don't even know what AP is. They don't even know about the opportunity, and it's not told to them. So really, I think one of the first steps is allowing the student to be an advocate for their own pathway, which is what's said by one of those talented students in the panel before, which was amazing. And that panel was mind-blowing, and yeah, it was fantastic. So the communication aspect, also honestly language, as far as continuously say you are gifted, you are smart, you are intelligent, versus something that can be acquired, something that, for example, like work ethic, and where you are encouraging them to think beyond it. It's just something that you were born with versus something that you can actually work for. So a lot of students, hearing that continuously, every single grade that passes where they're not identified as gifted or smart or intelligent, or not hearing the certain adjectives to describe them, that confidence, lowers every single year that goes on. So kind of changing a little bit of the language where we kind of encourage students to be more inquisitive, enthusiastic, advocates for themselves, to work harder, to work on their skill set, is going to be, pretty crucial. Honestly, sorry, I have a list of these things, reliant just on scores and tests. But I think, like we heard in the student panel, representation, the fact that there's a lack of representation that already exists in these classes, as well as a lack of representation for teachers of color. So whenever the students do go into these classes, they don't feel as comfortable. So, thinking about all of those things together, I think the number one thing is that just giving the students the opportunity to be advocates for themselves, and also kind of changing the way we think about, okay, who is AIG or who deserves to be in these rigorous classes beyond just who is naturally gifted. And so thinking of ourselves a little bit more as, I think Dr. Bullock in our previous meeting had said, like talent scouts in a way, versus anything else. So.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your acknowledging the difference between that kind of fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Many times push. And so just to kind of go back off of that question, Dr. Bullock, will you please weigh in and just tell us what are some barriers that you have witnessed in your district?
Yeah, I think Mr. Lucas spoke brilliantly to some of the barriers that we've also seen. And I guess I'll just elaborate a little bit and say that in education in general, we often create artificial barriers that keep kids out of classes that we really need to eliminate. And so an artificial barrier may be you need to have a 90 in like a grade of a 90 in a previous class to enroll in an honors class. And, and with that, that is very arbitrary in what goes into that grade that we're looking for. Was that a grade based on work ethic? Was that a grade based on a child's behavior? And so we put these, sometimes we put criteria up or barriers up that just really give no indication of a student's success in a future class. And so if I'm a student who may have struggled historically in a standard level class due to lack of engagement, and I'm looking to participate in something more rigorous, something more challenging, now my challenges from a previous class are preventing me from enrolling in something more challenging. And I think just generally speaking, we need to use data to be inclusive. And I think Ms. Cross spoke about that a little bit earlier about how do we use data to be inclusive as opposed to using it to exclude, which is sometimes how we use data. We look at this and say, you don't have this score, you can't be in this class, as opposed to looking at data and say, well, here's what you made here. Let's bring you in here. And these are the supports we're going to put in place to ensure your success in this more rigorous course. So that's one thing. I totally co-sign the racial makeup of classes and teachers. That makes a difference. I'll pause there though, because I can go on about all of these.
I know. We all can. I feel like this can be like a 10-day conversation. So we do gotta cut it off at some point. But thank you both for your perspective on that. And so, kind of just moving on to, we mentioned about students being advocates for their education, and so we talked about this with the student panel. But what are the ways in which schools and districts can support and encourage parents to advocate for their students' needs? And so I'm going to go back to you, Dr. Bullock, if you don't mind.
All right, I'll keep it as short as possible. All right, so I think one of the phrases that I love, or first of all, I want to say from a district level and from a school level, it's very successful when it's a collaborative effort from even different departments to make things happen. So I'm here today, but let me tell you, our advanced academics department, our student support services, or the students themselves could have been here in my seat to share with you what I'm sharing. But I say that because one of the things I want to borrow, or phrases I want to borrow from our student support services department, they talk about aggressively recruiting students into advanced academics. And so that means it can't just be like a casual invitation, like, hey, I've noticed that you've experienced some success here. We would like for you to enroll in this class. No, we have to be a little more persistent and focused in our recruitment of students. And when it comes to parents, like Mr. Lucas is saying, like sometimes parents may not be aware of the benefits of enrolling in certain classes because maybe they were excluded from those opportunities when they were in school. So we have to be like really intentional and focused in reaching out to parents, not only extending that opportunity for their students to be enrolled, but explaining the why, explaining the benefits of enrolling in more rigorous classes and how that's beneficial not only for their current high school experience, but beyond, thinking about post-secondary and life outcomes after K-12.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cyrus, if you don't mind, could you weigh in a little bit on that question as well?
Sure, absolutely. I think, we always talk about as parents are needing to advocate for their students, really starting as local as possible. So bringing in that school, bringing in those parents to provide those opportunities. So, whether it's, some schools out there that have parent university nights, right? Well, they bring in parents and they have information sessions just for them. Of course, that was pre-COVID. I'm not sure. I'm sure they're doing virtual parent university nights right now, but again, helping them to know the why and understand how this will benefit their student. We think that's hugely important. And then also helping parents to help their students make the connections. There are so many opportunities that are available to our students today. So thinking about really intentionally, what are my interests and passions, what I want to do here in high school, but beyond, and how can I tap into these programs and opportunities so that I can get to that place. And so really, whether that's working with the counselors and that student support services team, whether it's administrators, but just providing that wraparound that wraparound care. And I love that aggressively recruiting students. That is so important. And one of the key pieces of our, realizing equity and excellence, our call to action and our critical actions is all about being a talent scout, right? And so seeking out, looking for talent in a number of ways to ensure that students are tapped for these opportunities. And also, we talked about this last week a little bit with Mr. Lucas, like how do we then look for teachers of color who we know they're out there and they could be leading the way in some of these arenas. So, but just being a talent scout and trying to help bring in parents and helping them advocate for their children. So lots of ways.
Thank you both for that perspective. And I really like how it's just flowing right from the student panel right into this educator panel, like just that kind of reaching out, making connections. I love it. I love it. So kind of moving back, going towards your last comment about, just reaching out to parents and being that talent scout, whether it's for teachers of color or for parents or for students. So one thing that we're wondering, and I know everyone is wondering, so what are some promising practices, some promising programs that you've seen or created that provide this equitable access for all students into rigorous coursework? And Mr. Lucas, if you'll start us off.
Sure. So last year I had started the Academic Outreach Initiative with the intent of recruiting students of color and underprivileged students into our rigorous classes, because as we look at the data, and it's not just exclusive to our school or our county, or our state, it's all across the country. When we look at the numbers in AIG, AP, everything, the data, the students of color and underprivileged students are not represented, as they should be with the demographics of the school. So that was kind of one of the first initial goals, like the other panelists have said, using the data as a tool to combat the systemic oppression that has plagued us throughout generations and generations, and now use that for systemic change. And so with academic outreach, what we do is we create a committee of teachers and counselors, and try and think of different ways to recruit students. And what we allow is for the teachers then to send us names of students that can potentially take AP honors or dual enrollment. And then from that point on, I meet with those students personally one-on-one, and I encourage the teachers to also meet with them and explain the benefits of the different classes, because obviously they're quite different as well, as far as their benefit and who's capable and what fits them best. But then after I meet with them, the counselors then, they put a note by that student's name, so they know that when they meet with that student with the registration process, they know to encourage that student personally for one of those classes. So this year we are trying to add a few different portions to that initiative, which are, attracting the students for success. We do know for a fact after last year's initiative, where we had 87 recruits that were sent to us, 80% of them did sign up for a more rigorous course. For this year's initiative, we had over 100 names that were sent to us. And obviously we're compiling the data right now, but we're also adding on several different initiatives, like a social media campaign where we are empowering the students and the parents to access the information of these classes themselves, to ask questions themselves, kind of to not just have teachers or counselors as the gatekeepers to these courses, where the students can then just ask questions. But I think one of the important things, though, is to change that mindset of it just being grades to find these kids. Now, that has to be part of it, like what's been spoken already, the universal testing, or recognizing the success that already exists within those students that are already scoring high, they're going unnoticed. But also, like I said before, looking at the kids that are inquisitive, the kids that are engaged, the kids that are enthusiastic about learning, no matter how they are speaking, no matter how they are acting, you are just encouraging those students. And one of the things, and I'll say this as quickly as possible, this is one of my favorite ways to recruit students in my standard level courses, to see if they're able to take my AP courses, is to ask them who is the greatest musician of all time. And then from that point on, I kind of see, are they able to have a evidence-backed claim? And then I kind of teach them how to do that if they don't do it already, and to see how quickly they're able to adapt to that. Because as an AP teacher, I know that it's more about skill than it is about anything. Those kids are not going to come in knowing inherently all the names and everything for AP Euro, but do they have the skills and the ability to adapt and adjust? So I'm looking for those skills rather than just the grades themselves. And if the student does not, then, and now I'm talking about the the younger kids, the elementary level. And this is what academic outreach is kind of morphing into for the elementary level. If the students don't place into AIG, then there should be some type of program that keeps them on track still to encourage them to take those rigorous classes later on, to encourage them to be engaged, to encourage them to have deeper level thinkings. And every single year, obviously, they try and join the AIG program, but we are still encouraging those students where, oh, sorry, you didn't place in, too bad. So continuing that encouragement and empowerment for our students is absolutely crucial, but thinking a little bit outside the box beyond grades is crucial.
Thank you for the perspective. And I love the fact that you mentioned the fact that, if they're not testing in right now, we still need to be working with our students so that they can be challenged academically as well as socially, so that maybe later on they're able and feel comfortable to take these advanced courses. Ms. Cross, did you want to weigh in on that one as well?
Yes, thank you. Well, Dr. Bullock and Mr. Lucas have touched on a lot of things. I just want to say the intentional collaboration between divisions in a school and a school building in a district, it is so important that the voices are working together, because if we remain in silos, and the work that one division is doing is not going to be known about another, it can undo what that division is working on. So that is ultimately, that's so important, because we're looking at all of our students. All of these students are all of our students. And just because some test into AIG or a portfolio into AIG doesn't mean that higher level learning cannot happen with every single student in our schools. It just may be a different pace. It may just be different. It's about personalized learning. Some of the promising practices, talent development is what I think that you're describing, Mr. Lucas. We call it talent development at the state level. And we suggest that this starts early with our K-3 students. And Dr. Bullock mentioned that. We're talking about rigorous advanced learning opportunities for every single student in every single kindergarten, first and second grade and third grade classroom, not just for some. No one qualifies for talent development. It's for all, because it's about exposure. It's about that early exposure, because it doesn't just happen between 8th and 9th grades. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on the strengths of our students. When we are looking at data, if we're looking at test data, are we tending to look at the weaknesses of the student, or do we really focus on the strengths? Maybe let's have conversations about the strengths of our students and see how we can flip that conversation. And also remember that the data is not limited to test scores. I think somebody put that in the chat even. It's about knowing your students, and the data, it's all around us, and we need to be looking at every piece to make sure that we're serving our students' needs. The other piece is about identification. And one of the things that we've talked about with our initiative is ensuring that we're providing multiple opportunities for our students to show their strengths. It's not just a one and done. It's not just that test in second and third grade. There are multiple opportunities and also multiple ways for students to show us our strengths, because it may not be that test, as Dr. Bullock mentioned. So it's not about having multiple hoops for me to show you perfection 5 different times. It's about multiple opportunities. Another idea that some districts are beginning to employ is using local norming. So instead of the national norming and comparing our students to the national picture, what are we doing maybe at the district level or even at the school level? Who stands out in our school? And so that's part of that local, I'm going to go back to that local flexibility, and then lifting those students up. Removing the artificial barriers that Dr. Bullock mentioned about. I mean, take a look at those prerequisites. Are they real, or are they not? So it's not about putting up barriers and hurdles. It's about expanding access and opportunities and focusing on their interests, like Stephanie mentioned. And in one district, they have eliminated these barriers, and they've left it up to their schools to meet the needs of their local population. Another piece is about there's a district I'd like to highlight. Onslow County has started thinking about their secondary students and how much the parents do and don't know about what's available. And so they have nights every month or every 2 weeks. And their goal is to build a culture where parents expect to hear from them. And I think that intentionality is so important as well, because then that expectation is there, and it's about building that culture and making this something that we expect for our students.
Thank you.
That was a lot.
So again, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will have a question and answer portion at the end of this discussion. And so, you know, we're talking about practices and promising practices and all of that. And so I'm wondering, what role does state funding and teacher preparation play in ensuring that all students have access to rigorous coursework? And so, Ms. Cyrus, if you don't mind, if you could jump in on that one. And I'm just going to state the question again. What role does state funding and teacher preparation play in ensuring that all students have access to rigorous coursework?
Right, thank you. Funding is certainly an important question. And so North Carolina is super fortunate that we do actually have state funding, and every district and every charter school across the state receives funding. It's a set amount of funding times 4% of your average daily membership. So every school district and every charter school is receiving that money. That's their district or charter school. That's, for their case, it's their allotment. And really, I think one of the things that's really helpful is that this kind of sets the tone and helps people understand that there is an expectation that there is giftedness in every single community. Every school, every community. It doesn't matter how rural you are. It doesn't matter how many Title I students you have. It doesn't matter the diversity of the students. There are gifted students in every population, and it sets that expectation up. So there is state funding, and Beth and I, part of our work is to help districts better understand how to utilize that money and how they can use it for some of these efforts, their talent development efforts, for their identification practice efforts. So we talk about the funding and how to go about making very strategic, intentional use of those funds. But that professional development is every bit as important, that preparation of teachers. And so in our North Carolina program standards, we do have a standard all about personnel and professional development and making sure that the preparation opportunities you're offering to your teachers, so first of all, not just teachers, but all different stakeholder groups, that it aligns to your other district initiative, but also aligns to best practice. It also aligns to these thinking skills. I love that Mr. Lucas keeps talking about mindset. That is so critically important. We have to see kids at potential and know that they can do this work. And so that teacher preparation is extremely important. Building in rigor, building in depth and complexity of all courses, starting very young. Those are important pieces. And so teacher preparation cannot be understated. And in fact, in part of our brief, when we talk about critical actions for realizing equity and excellence, there's one critical action all about providing focused professional learning opportunities to help us change our mindsets about students, help us better understand what giftedness is and giftedness can be, and that it's not some lockstep what you're born with. And so I appreciate that insight being brought up as well. And those are some of the things, but we also have state funding through the AP partnership, which you mentioned, Ashley, at the beginning, right? You know, just last year, over 600 teachers attended the AP Summer Institute. So teachers can become better prepared for teaching in that AP environment. So as well as there's partnership monies that we spend for middle school teachers to begin that vertical alignment process. Because again, there's not some magic switch between 8th and 9th grade. It has to start early, and it is continuous. And so those are just a few things. There's also the dual enrollment incentive and some things like that. But I'll stop because I could, again, go into lots.
All right, Dr. Bullock, will you weigh in on this question? And just to kind of repeat it, is what role does state funding and teacher preparation play in ensuring that all students have access to rigorous coursework?
Yeah, I'd like to echo with what Ms. Cyrus was saying, in that, you know, funding is key. Funding is how we provide more personnel in schools to support this work. And I want to talk a little bit more about the teacher preparation, though, because in my work, we've been providing a lot of district-wide training around implicit bias and microaggressions. And I want to go back to something that a student shared on the student panel about enrolling in some of these classes and being subject to microaggressions from the teacher in the class. And one of the harsh realities is that many of our advanced classes have often been spaces, majority for white students. And sometimes when students of color enroll in those classes, they may be one of a few. And it may not, first of all, just by the demographics of the class, it's not necessarily the most welcoming space for them. So teachers really need professional development and support in making sure that that truly is a welcoming space for diverse students. And that is that can pose a challenge when very often we teach the way we were taught. We may have grown up in systems that didn't validate authors of color. Let's say if we're talking about an advanced ELA class, or we didn't learn much about diverse people's history or the histories of people of color. So the content that we're discussing in those classes may not be relevant for more diverse students. And we have to understand the reality that North Carolina is an increasingly diverse student population that we're serving, or we're serving an increasingly diverse student population, and we have to evolve with the times. We should have always been validating and supporting people of color in our content and in the spaces that we create, like in creating those welcoming spaces. We should have always been doing that, but it is becoming increasingly important now with a more and more diverse student population that we're serving. So I just want to go back to that teacher preparation and say, you know, helping teachers to understand their implicit biases and how they manifest in class, and how they can cause some students to feel alienated or not feel a part of the student community is important. We have to understand that, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to address those implicit biases so that they don't continue to harm diverse students who enroll in our classes.
Thank you so much for both of your perspective. And I do just want to add, you know, when Dr. Bullock was speaking about our growing diversity in student population, we are at this point, I believe over 50% of our student population is diverse. And when I say diverse, I mean there are students of color from, you know, African-American, Hispanic, Latinx, a lot of different nationalities and ethnicities in that. And yet our educators are still at this point, I believe, and someone can correct me, about 80% white at this point in time. And so that's going to be a huge mismatch. And I think, you know, going off of what Dr. Bullock was saying, and I'm just going to add this point, and then I'm going to stop and go to our last question. But, you know, we tend to think that when we're saying these things, we really want to just focus on students of color. And yes, we do want to focus on students of color. We want to focus on those from low income backgrounds and support them because they haven't gotten that before. But we also have to realize, like, all of these things are just best practices in general for all students. Because if we are going into a diverse population, that means that everyone is going to have to start interacting with diverse people from diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds. So I think that's something that everyone here understands, but I just want to say explicitly that all of these things that we're talking about are going to affect all students, but we especially need to help those who have support those who have not been supported in the ways that they needed to be supported in the past. And so just to piggyback off of that, we're going to jump into our last question so we can get to our Q&A portion. But what advice do you all have for educators in preparing and supporting students in providing access to rigorous coursework? And you all can jump in at that point.
Can I start?
Go ahead.
Just to piggyback off of what Dr. Bullock said, I think one is to really reflect on your own implicit biases. I think that's first. I think they also need to know that students can receive the same content, or it's not about receiving the same content at the same time, at the same pace. It's about personalized learning, which can be overwhelming, I think. So it's about, you don't have to do this on your own. Most of our districts in North Carolina have professional learning communities, other educators for you to lean on, and specialists in the school. And then also with that first part, there may be an equity team at the school. I think it's about being that lifelong learner that we all went into teaching to talk to our students about being, and we've got to do that as well. And it's about recognizing students who come with easily recognizable gifts and talents, and that's fine, but it's about being a talent scout that we've mentioned earlier, and intentionally creating environments to recognize and develop talents in those who are not yet tapped.
Yeah, I'll add on to that because I think that one of the things, especially what Dr. Bullock was saying there, which is absolutely crucial, is that the data exists and we can't ignore the data. So we know based off the data that we have a huge opportunity gap based off of race and based off of people that have been plagued generation after generation with poverty. And we have to understand that data is not coincidental, data is consequential. And it is a consequence of a system that was designed this way, right? So in order to fight for these issues of equity, we have to recognize that students don't come from the same backgrounds, they don't have the same experiences, and they don't have necessarily the same set of skills and talent. However, so many students have different levels of potential. So I think one of the first things that all teachers have to be willing to do is have that difficult conversation. And I was just seeing it in the chat, and I just really wanted to address it. Yeah, we have to have the difficult conversation of the role that race has played within recommending kids for AIG or for these honors level courses. Like Ms. Morgan Lopez had said in the student panel, when she had went into her class and the students said, you might need to rethink your schedule because I don't think you're in there. And it was only based, I mean, we can assume it was only based obviously off of her race because that's the only thing that the teacher knew about that student. And so therefore, we have to have the first thing is that these teachers have to have difficult conversations, and the schools in general have to have it. And for Cumberland County, I'm excited because we are now implementing in the fall a required module for equity, where even though the PD won't necessarily change or necessarily directly implement those changes that are needed, but it's at least a good start that shows that this is the expected narrative now. And that's kind of part of our goals here is to change the narrative and to be willing to challenge ourselves to have these uncomfortable conversations. And just like one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless we face it. So therefore, in order to really fix these issues of the opportunity gap, we have to be willing to challenge ourselves to have these uncomfortable conversations. We have to kind of rethink, how are we assessing AIG, AP, honors, and then what are we doing to empower our students to advocate for themselves rather than just keep ourselves as the gatekeepers to these amazing opportunities and benefits, because we do know that these programs have amazing benefits for these students post secondary.
Ashley, were you saying? I think you're muted.
Oh, I did the same mistake. I was just saying any other advice, but you jumped in. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I encourage educators to continue to, immerse themselves in literature that might be helpful in further investigating topics like this. I went and got up and grabbed this book, Despite the Best Intentions, How Racial Inequality Thrives in Good Schools. We did a book study on this in our district a couple of years ago, but essentially I bring that up because, and this goes back to something Mr. Lucas was saying about we have to acknowledge the role that we play in the inequities we see. So, but the only way we're going to see those inequities is to look. We have to look and see how is racial inequity, class inequity, whatever, manifesting in our school on our watch. And while we can't own all of the inequity that may happen in our school due to outside factors, we have to own the part that we play in the inequity and the disparities. And so honestly, we all, included, me included, have to be able to identify what I'm doing to close gaps and how some of my practices may actually be widening gaps. And where I see that some of my practices may be widening those gaps, I have to change those practices so that we're increasing opportunities for students, we're closing that access gap to advanced academics, and just making sure that the work that we are doing is done intentionally to increase and improve outcomes for our most marginalized students.
I don't know, Ashley, if there's much that I can add to that. Just some amazing advice there. You know, we are doing so much of the same work, really, and thinking about these students, changing first our mindsets and looking at them as students at potential, not at risk, because these kids are not coming to us as empty vessels. They do have strengths and they do have a lot for us to tap into to really reach students. And so just really thinking about that, but also thinking about mindsets and policy and practice. It really takes all of those things together for us to continue to move forward. And I can just remember not really thinking so much about the policy, you know, that seems kind of dry and, you know, not as interesting, but it's policy that really has an opportunity to help us move forward leaps and bounds, because that then we're all held to, and we aren't so dependent on a single educator here or there willing to have the conversation and willing to step up and advocate, right? It levels the playing field in so many ways. So that mindset's going to get us huge steps forward, adding that to that, the policy, and then also our practices. We think all of those things together, that's going to help us create systems that do help us improve outcomes for students. And that's really what it's all about. How do we bring those things together to change and positively change outcomes for students? And it's just so exciting to hear all these pieces that just really nicely align together. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you all for your participation today. I really have enjoyed hearing your different practices and different perspective on this issue, the different policies that we have in place. And so we are nearing the very end. So I apologize, we don't have a time for a lot of questions, but there were 2 questions that are very similar. So I want to ask them. And also just acknowledge the fact that there have been a lot of comments in the chat about systemic change. And I think that's what we're all talking about here. Just the systemic change in mindset, the systemic change through policy, like Stephanie just mentioned, just to make sure that we are ensuring that all students have access again, so that all students can reach their full potential. So again, thank you all for your comments and your perspective. So this question again was one question that was it was 2 questions, and I'm going to try to turn into one because they're very similar. And so this idea of calling a student gifted, of, you know, academically gifted, intellectually gifted. So they're wondering if maybe we should do away with that term, because is that not putting students in certain categories based off of our own perception of them? Maybe we need to redefine or, you know, rethink how we say students are gifted. What are your perspectives on that?
So, I mean, I'm happy to jump in here. You know, Beth, I think, talked about this earlier, right? Is that gifted is not about exclusion, but it really is about meeting the needs of a student. And so when we say that a student is academically or intellectually gifted, we're saying that they have needs that require being met, and that it requires more than what's happening in the regular educational environment. So they have needs above and beyond. And so, you know, just practically speaking, the system that we live in is that we identify students so that their needs are met. It's not about exclusion at all. And so when I talk to parents or coordinators, we always talk about, so what are the needs of the students? Now, you're right, gifted can be kind of a loaded term, and people can have impressions. People tend to have deep-seated feelings about giftedness. But when we talk about it, we look at that state definition, right? It is having students have the capacity in intellectual areas or specific academic fields, and that they have needs that require above and beyond what's provided in the regular classroom. And so that's kind of, just one layer of the puzzle, or one piece of the puzzle. I don't know, Beth, if you wanted to add to that. We were kind of kicking that around earlier.
No, I think you did a great job. But sometimes it's hard to represent gifted. Gifted has a lot of myths surrounding it, which kind of fuel these biases, I think, that occur. But it hopefully with our strategic initiative for equity and excellence in gifted education, we're hoping to change that. And we're in year 2 of this multi-year strategic initiative. And I'd say look for great things and get involved in your district's rewriting or revising of their local AIG plan, because it's about serving the needs of students who have advanced learning needs. And that will happen this next year.
And I just want to say briefly, I agree with what Ms. Cyrus and Ms. Cross have shared with us about the definitions of giftedness. And I would just say with that, and we have to believe in the inherent genius and giftedness in every child. So I think there are situations where, like, for example, for lack of a better term, like extensions of learning may need to be provided for students to meet their need. But there also needs to be a mindset of every child that comes into our school has some level of giftedness in some way. And how do we find that and cultivate that in the children? So.
Right, and just adding on as quickly as possible, just, if the teachers kind of change their idea of what inherently is gifted, that will be a big part of the puzzle as far as taking AIG from being what is thought to be exclusive to inclusive, as far as, the recruitment process, everything, because words can obviously change meaning, and words, the moment you hear a word, it can, through a concerted effort, words can have a different reaction. So the whole goal is, when you hear gifted, students don't think, oh, it's something that just means that's something that's being told to this student, but it doesn't apply to me. It's something that you can be coached to do, something that you can work for, and something that you can feel special about. Because, like Dr. Bullock said, that sure, while a student might not be traditionally gifted in one facet, they are in another. And so just finding that for each student, also kind of encouraging that potential.
Thank you. And again, I apologize because I know there are some great questions here and we do not have time to get to them. But I again want to thank all of you for joining us in this conversation. I know that you all are still diligently working on this because there are some issues that we need to work on in terms of getting all our students access to rigorous coursework, but I do appreciate that you have pointed out ways in which we are working towards that goal. So thank you all for sharing your perspective, your experiences, and your work today. I just want to say thank you to all the attendees that showed up today and listened to our students and our educators. We are wrapping up this session. You will find an evaluation link in the chat. Also, you will find that this session is recorded and will be posted on our Dudley Flood Center landing page under resources. So you'll be able to go there tomorrow and find a recording of this if you weren't able to stay the whole time, or if you missed a portion of it, or if you want to share it. Also, again, a link to an evaluation has been put into the chat. So we ask that you please take the evaluation. If you are in need of CEUs, we do provide that through the evaluation link. So once you're able to take that evaluation, it will ask you if you need CEUs. Please use that to give us your feedback. We want to know what you think. Some things that you need, support that you need. We want to hear from you. And thank you again for attending today. And again, thank you to our students and our educators. And thank you to our educators in general. We appreciate you. And we thank you for joining us today. Thank you all.